Hey everybody, this is John, and this week I'm going to do something completely shocking, something bizarre, something that I never thought I'd do. I'm going to write a Christmas novella. Before we get to the Christmas novella, though, let's talk about what we're going to discuss this week. We're going to continue what we started 2 weeks ago and talk about eschatology and end times theology. And this week, we're going to focus specifically on one doctrine, namely that of the rapture. The rapture is one of those ideas that captures people's attention because it seems so strange, at least the way that it's usually presented. The idea that one day all of the Christians in the world are just going to vanish, disappear as they're taken up into heaven. Now, normally when people talk about the rapture, they ask people what kind of rapture do they believe in? Do they believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, a mid-tribulation rapture, or a post-tribulation rapture? In other words, when everything goes to hell in a handbasket, both literally and figuratively, when will God do the rapture? Will he do it before everything goes to pot? Will he do it after? Will he do it at some midway point? That's a question you may be wondering about since, I'm an amillennialist. What kind of a rapture does an amillennialist believe in? Well, I'm not going to answer that question just yet, because if I answer it the way that I normally do, you're going to want an explanation, so I'll give you the explanation first. The first thing that I think we need to discuss is a linguistic idea that I call definitional baggage. When you use a word, you're not just using the dictionary definition of the word. There are also images and concepts that are tied into that word that are unspoken, things that another speaker of the language will instantly pick up on, images and ideas that they will share with the person doing the speaking. I'll give you an example. Take the word snow. Now, the dictionary would probably define snow as frozen precipitation that falls during wintertime. But if you say snow to different people in English-speaking countries, they're going to have different ideas of what snow is. Let's talk about a more specific kind of snow. What do you think of when I say the word blizzard? You see, here's the thing. Depending upon where you live, a blizzard has a different definitional baggage. For example, earlier this week, I took a look on the internet and I Googled Texas blizzard and I found this image. And the blogger who took this picture talked about how they had a blizzard in his hometown that dropped 4 inches of snow. And I read that and I said, 4 inches? Come on. I'm a native Minnesotan. When I think of the word blizzard, I think of the Halloween blizzard of 1991. When we got 3 feet of snow in less than 24 hours. But see, for a Minnesotan, the word blizzard has certain definitional baggage. For a person from Texas, it has completely different definitional baggage. And I think the problem that we run into with the rapture is that there is some missing definitional baggage. But before we get into that specific definitional baggage, it's time to write the Christmas novella. This Christmas novella we'll call Sarah's First Christmas. And it's the story of a young woman named Sarah. Sarah has always loved Christmas, and specifically, she's always loved her family get-togethers, when all of her extended family would gather together at one spot and celebrate Christmas for several days. Sarah just absolutely loved it. Part of the reason why is because it meant she could see Uncle Bob. Uncle Bob is her favorite person in the whole world, and so she loved the time that she could spend with her cousins, with Uncle Bob, with family, and just loved it so much that that was the one thing she was looking forward to someday doing, was being the host of one of these family Christmases. Well, it took a while. She had to get through college, she had to get married, she had to get a house big enough to host everybody, but finally it was Sarah's turn to host her very first Christmas. And she was so excited she made these grand and elaborate plans for what was going to happen and how wonderful it was going to be. And I'm sure you see where this is going. None of those plans came to fruition. For example, she was looking forward to having all of her nieces and nephews there so that they could play with the toys that she had bought them. However, her brother went through a rather messy divorce, and as a result, his ex-wife got the kids for Christmas that year, and so those kids couldn't be there, which caused a problem with the other kids because her brother's kids are the one who organized and kept them all playing. Without them there, they didn't play at all. Another example is Sarah's younger brother brought his college girlfriend home with him, which in and of itself wouldn't be a problem, except these two don't want to spend time with the family. They want to sneak off and be by themselves for, how shall I put this, unsanctified celebrations of their own. The meal is ruined, everything is going horribly, but Sarah is still holding out that this will be a good Christmas because Uncle Bob has promised to come. But then, Uncle Bob calls her and reveals that due to a blizzard in Chicago, he can't come to Christmas. Sarah is devastated. She's depressed. She's sad. She mopes around the house until finally her husband pulls her aside and cheers her up by reminding her what the true meaning of Christmas really is all about. Awesome. It's destined for the bestseller list, right? So let's keep going with this speculative story. The next piece of the speculative story is that I found a personality cult centered around myself. And this cult worships and reveres me, and especially the things that I've written. Okay, that's factor number one. Factor number two is that 500 years from now, due to a climactic shift, there is no such thing as snow anymore. Well, I shouldn't say there's no such thing as snow, but snow is that white stuff you see on the top of mountains every now and then, or snow is the stuff that falls during the winter but then melts an hour later. In other words, by and large, most of the people on Earth have forgotten what snow is. Not only that, but English has become a dead language, sort of like Latin. The people of the future have just as much ability to read English and understand English as, say, the average American has in understanding Sanskrit. So what happens is my personality cult in the meantime has exploded. It's become a dominant world religion, and a group of people want to translate my writings from dead English into the contemporary language of the time. And so they start translating that Christmas novella, Sarah's First Christmas, and they run into a problem. When they come to Uncle Bob's phone call, they hit that word blizzard. And the problem is that they don't have an equivalent term in their contemporary language. Remember, nobody's ever seen a blizzard for 500 years. So they put their heads together and they realized they could try to explain in the story that way back when there were such things as blizzards, massive snowfalls that could shut down entire cities, but they say, no, we don't want to do that. The great Adi God wrote it this way, and we don't want to mess with it. So we'll just use our word for snow, and that'll have to be good enough. So they write snow in there, and so now it's not that Uncle Bob was trapped in Chicago because of a blizzard. He is now unable to come because of snow. It's pretty much the same meaning, right? I mean, it's a little bit more generic, but it's still the same meaning. But now let's say that another 500 years in the future, a rather odd belief surfaces among my followers. Some of them look at what they read in the Christmas novella and come to the realization that Uncle Bob is an uncaring jerk, that he's never loved Sarah. And the reason why is because we know what snow is. Snow is that white stuff on top of the mountain. Snow is that stuff that falls and then melts an hour later. How on earth would snow ever keep somebody from visiting somebody that they love? So they come to the conclusion that Uncle Bob is an uncaring jerk. Suddenly the Christmas novella that I wrote suddenly becomes the story of Sarah's unrequited love for her Uncle Bob, and how Uncle Bob doesn't share that love in return. In other words, because people have lost the definitional baggage of blizzard, they now interpret that passage in the completely wrong way. So what does this have to do with the rapture? Well, it's my belief that the same thing has happened in one of the key passages about the rapture, namely 1 Thessalonians 4. This is the go-to cornerstone passage for the rapture. It's where the whole thing grows out of. And it says this. This is from the New International Version, by the way, but most translations translate this about the same. It goes something like this. Brothers, we do not want you to be ignorant about those who fall asleep or to grieve like the rest of men who have no hope. We believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. According to the Lord's own word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left till the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage each other with these words. Now, specifically, the word that we're looking for, the word that's lost its definitional baggage, comes in verse 17, where St. Paul writes that we will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet, that word meet, the Lord in the air. You see, in the original Greek, that word meet is apantesin, and this is a very special word with some very specific definitional baggage. It does mean meet, but it's also a reference to an ancient custom that people had when they were visiting with rulers and foreign dignitaries. I'll give you an example. When Alexander the Great was approaching Jerusalem on his mad conquest of the world, he approached Jerusalem, and the people in Jerusalem knew what was about to happen. If they resisted Alexander, they would get slaughtered. And so the chief priests and the leaders of the people actually left the city as Alexander approached, and they went out to him, and they met him outside the city walls. After they had greeted him, they threw open the gates and they escorted him into the city. What they did was they apantesined him. They met him. As a matter of fact, apantesin is the word that Flavius Josephus, the Jewish historian, uses when he describes that entire encounter. To put it in more generic terms, is that when a ruler came to visit his people, the leaders of the city would go out and meet him outside the city walls and escort him the rest of the way in. Now, this is something that doesn't happen nowadays all that often. The most modern equivalent that I could think of would be, say, if you have some kids and your parents are coming to visit them. So your kids are plastered up against the window watching for Grandma and Grandpa, and the minute that Grandma and Grandpa pull up, the kids immediately run through the front door, meet them halfway down the sidewalk, give them a big hug, and then walk them into the house. They have apantesined. So when we're having a discussion like this about Greek terms and phraseology, it's often good to see how that word or phrase is used elsewhere in the Bible. And I've only been able to find one other time when the word apantesin is used in the New Testament, and that's actually in the book of Acts. Specifically, Acts 28, verse 15. As Paul is approaching the city of Rome to stand trial before Nero, we're told that, and this is verse 15, the brothers there had heard that we were coming, and they traveled as far as the Forum of Appius and the 3 taverns to meet us. Once again, that word meet is apantesin. In other words, as Paul is approaching the city of Rome, Christians from Rome left Rome to meet Paul along the way and then travel with him into the city. So now that we've defined apantesin as referring to that custom of going out to meet a dignitary and then escorting them back in, how does this apply to the rapture? Well, think about it this way. Think about what all of those examples that I gave don't say. For example, Alexander approaching Jerusalem. When the chief priests came out to meet him, Alexander didn't grab the chief priests and drag them back to Macedonia. When your kids run out to see their grandparents, Grandma and Grandpa do not grab the kids, throw them in the back of the station wagon, and go back to the retirement home in Florida. And in the case of Paul, when Paul meets the delegation, or that he is met by the delegation from Rome, he doesn't say, great, thanks for coming out here, now let's all go back to Jerusalem. No, this is the implied movement, the definitional baggage of apantesin that we have to keep in mind. That the people doing the meeting escort the one being met to where they were before. That if we keep that definitional baggage in mind, we get a very different picture of what the rapture is. It's not that Jesus is coming to suck us all up into heaven. Instead, we are the ones who go up to meet him, which means we escort him down the rest of the way. In other words, it's the opposite of what usually gets taught. So why is apantesin such a big deal? Well, I believe that that has definitional baggage to it. Definitional baggage that St. Paul intended to convey, and definitional baggage that the original readers, the Thessalonians, would have picked up immediately. They would have had that mental image of people rising up to meet Christ and escorting him back down again that would have been implied even if it wasn't directly stated. The problem is that now that we are translating apantesin from Greek into English, we're losing that definitional baggage. I mean, to say to meet him in the air is perfectly fine from a translational point of view. It's a generic meaning of apantesin, but it loses that flavor, it loses that definitional baggage that I think is so important to understanding what is really going on. Again, this is part of the reason why I'm an amillennialist rather than a dispensational premillennialist. Because here's the thing, the dispensational premillennialists, I have never seen them deal with the term apantesin before. They have never looked at what it means to meet Jesus in the air. At least I've never found anything. If you know of an article or a book that does, please let me know, because I haven't found anything. For example, a number of years ago, I bought a book by Tim LaHaye called Rapture Under Attack. I figured that one of the leading proponents of dispensational premillennialism would have to tackle apantesin at some point. And instead, what I found was a lot of hand-wringing by Tim LaHaye about how pre-tribulation rapture beliefs are under attack in Christianity and how people don't see the clear meaning of Scripture when it's presented to them. And my response is, you are dealing with the definitional baggage, Tim. Okay, maybe that's a little disrespectful, but you get the idea. And really, the other reason why I have a problem with talking about the rapture so much from 1 Thessalonians 4 is because when we do that, we're actually missing the point of 1 Thessalonians 4 by a mile. 1 Thessalonians 4 isn't really about the rapture. The rapture is just an incidental footnote in it. It's not the main point that Paul's trying to make. You see, if you look at 1 Thessalonians 4 in its context, in the context of when it was written in Paul's ministry, a very different picture emerges. You see, we believe that 1 Thessalonians 4 was one of, if not the, first letter that St. Paul ever wrote, sometime in the 50s. And by that I mean not the 1950s, but the just plain 50s. Anyway, it seems that during the early days of Paul's ministry, he was very focused on the second coming of Christ. That was what he talked about. That's what he believed was imminent, that before his life was over, Jesus would return. And you can see some of this fervor if you read the rest of 1 Thessalonians 4. Although the chapter and verse numbers are not an original part of the book, if you take a look at the end of every chapter in 1 Thessalonians, Paul is talking about the end of the world, Jesus coming back, the second coming, the final judgment, all of that sort of a thing. You can only imagine what Paul's preaching in Thessalonica must have been like. He must have talked about it a lot. And then Paul left. And then it sounds like what happened is some people in Thessalonica, some Christians, died. And the other Thessalonian Christians freaked out because they were worried that these people that they had lost, these people who had died, would somehow miss out on Jesus' second coming. And so when Paul writes to them in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, he's trying to comfort them. He says it's okay to mourn, but you don't have to mourn like those who have no hope. We do have hope. And the hope is not the rapture, the hope is the resurrection. The fact that when Jesus returns, everyone will be resurrected. And those of us who are believers will be caught up to meet with him in the air, to escort him back to earth. In other words, the point of 1 Thessalonians 4 is not the rapture, it's the fact that no one will be left out. Nobody will be forgotten. That death is not a barrier into the entry of the coming kingdom. And that's really why I don't like that multiple choice question that I posed at the beginning of this video. What is an amillennialist? Is he or she a pre-trib, mid-trib, or post-trib rapture believer. I suppose technically you would say that we're post-trib, but I don't even like that because it still is tied into that misunderstanding of what the rapture is and how it all fits together. Instead, I like to say that we're D, none of the above, because the rapture that amillennialists believe in is completely unlike anything that's out there in the dispensational premillennialist teachings today. So there we go. That's what we have for this week. If you have any comments, any questions, please be sure to leave them in the comments section below. And again, if you have any questions for an amillennialist, well, go ahead and ask. I'll do my best to answer it. I'm not sure what we'll talk about in 2 weeks, so I guess you'll have to come back and be surprised. Until then, God bless you, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.